Now let's turn to Charleston, South Carolina, where overnight crews began to remove the statue of former Vice President John C. Calhoun. People have been protesting at that statue for days. This is just the latest in a wave of removals of statues and monuments from across the country, all part of a national reckoning of who we are and how we got here. In some cases, activists are tearing down statues themselves, and in others, local officials are voting to officially remove them. Joining me now to discuss, my dear friend Wes Moore. He is the CEO of New York's largest and most impactful poverty-fighting organization, Robin Hood, and they work to eradicate child poverty in our city of New York. And he's also the author of the brand new book, 5 Days, The Fiery Reckoning of an American City, which is about Baltimore in the aftermath of the death of Freddie Gray. Wes, always great to have you here. Congratulations on your new book. You and I have been on TV quite a bit over the last few weeks talking about racial injustice. What do you think about local governments from New York and South Carolina now deciding to remove statues?
I think what we're seeing is people who are reckoning with history. And I think it's an important process for this country to actually go through. First, not to mention the fact that we're talking about public infrastructure that are being paid for by public dollars. And I think it's important for taxpayers to have a say as to how their taxpayer dollars and what it's going to celebrate and what it's going to memorialize. But at the same time, there's also an important moment that our country is going through. And that is an idea and a prospect that we have to go through our own truth and trauma reconciliation process as a nation. We have to understand that the history that we have all been involved in now has an impact in the world that we're seeing right now. And loving your country doesn't mean lying about it. Loving your country actually means knowing about it, knowing its history, and then taking active and aggressive steps to actually make us better. And so the fact, I think about you have statues of Andrew Jackson. It's important that people understand the history of Andrew Jackson, and then also have a say of whether or not this is something that we want to commemorate and something that we want to honor them.
In many of the cases, we're seeing protesters take it upon themselves to tear down these statues. They are emotional, and it's understandable. But if one group takes down a statue, let's say of Andrew Jackson, doesn't that open a door for another group to take down a statue of Dr. Martin Luther King?
Yeah. Well, first, it is important, and part of the reason that we, as a society and our elected officials, need to be at the forefront of this conversation is there's a safety issue that we also have to contend with. However, what's happening is because there's been a lack of movement and a lack of conversation and a lack of transparency, that's when you have individuals who will then take this in their own hands. We can't have a situation where individuals are then just picking and choosing which elements they want to have up, because there is a lack of movement and because there's a lack of transparency on our governmental side. Our elected officials, the people who are there doing the job as representatives of us, need to be the ones who are leading on this conversations. Our government need to be the ones who are leading on a conversation about truth and trauma, because part of the reason we're seeing the actions that we're seeing is because there has been such little action when it comes to really being able to deal with our past and have a process where our country can actually come out of this in a unified fashion.
Speak to me as a parent. How should we remember someone like Thomas Jefferson, who helped found our country, but he was also a slave owner?
Yeah, I think we have to contend and wrestle with the fact that many of the founding fathers and the leaders of our nation, just like all of us and just like our nation as a whole, are imperfect. I mean, these are people who have taken on important leadership roles in our society. But also, I think as a society, we have to understand what it means and ask the question of what does it mean for me as a parent to know that we are going to spend time and celebrating individuals and people who, frankly, were either calling for or condoned or participated in the enslavement of my ancestors. I think about it as a former combat veteran, as a very, very proud member of the 82nd Airborne Division. My division is housed at a place called Fort Bragg. That's named after a General Braxton Bragg, a former slave owner and a former Confederate general. I would hope that at some point people would have asked me, how did you feel about doing your training and doing your work and serving with a unit when you had not just a Confederate general, but also someone who had owned hundreds of slaves as the base in which you had to maneuver out of. And so the thing that I want for my children to understand is when we're talking about the things that we're celebrating, people are imperfect. We understand that. But at the same time, I want my children to know that they are coming up in an environment and coming up in a culture and in a society where their history is being celebrated, where the history of the enslavement of them is not the first thing they're going to learn about their own history in this country, and that the country has a level of maturity and respect as we're thinking about who and what it is that we want to profile as not just leaders, but frankly, heroes within our society and people who helped us to get to a better place.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.